Mastering. Seemingly a black magic art afforded only to those that sacrifice their soul to the gods. Actually, in reality, mastering on its face is pretty simple of a concept. And if I can be quite honest, in the immortal words of Peter Griffith, it's easier than we're making it. Now, if you don't care about the video or the length of the video is scaring you because it's not 20-second YouTube short, the plugins are 1. Just a regular stock EQ, 2. GBST G-Clip, 3. TDR Katalnikov, and 4. LoudMax. Those are the plugins that we're going to use, and that I'll demonstrate. I'll show you a little later on in the video. So when we're talking about the goals of mastering, let's first talk about what mastering is not. Mastering is not just taking your mix and slamming it through a brick wall limiter. That is not mastering, and very often the results are just not very good. Additionally, mastering is also not where you save a bad mix. So don't think that, oh, I can take this mix and then I'll give it to the mastering engineer, he's going to fix everything. It just doesn't work that way. So if mastering is not just about loudness and it's not about saving a mix, what is the actual goal of mastering? To be simple, mastering is pretty much the enhancement of a mix that you already have. You're looking to bring out the extra 10% of a mix that's already there, and then making sure all the songs that you have would be a cohesive listening experience. Now, of course, in the days of old, mastering also had some technical aspects of it, putting the ISRC codes in, but you also had things like sequencing when you had CDs. That's where you would get that continuous listening experience, no gaps between the songs. Now that we know the goal of mastering and what we're meant to do in a master, what does that look like? In a sentence, the mastering process is, as I just said, an extension of mixing. Insofar, it's listening and analyzation. What does the mix already give me? How can I bring out that last 5 to 10% of the mix? How can I eke out that last little percentage of the mix to make it as exciting, as awesome as possible? Now, in the beginning of the video, I talked about the plugins that we're going to use. Now, just remember, how you use each plugin during each step is based entirely on what your mix sounds like. So it's a prerequisite already that you have a good, well-balanced mix, okay? In order to make the most out of all these plugins in this process. Okay, so EQ, very first part of the chain. What's the point of EQ, right? We did all this EQ with all the multi-tracks and blah, blah, blah. What's the point of EQ on a master chain? Well, there's 3 basic points. The first point is we can make very small repairs that show their face only after all the elements of the mix finally get bussed down into the final stereo out. The second point would be broad enhancements. So this could be stylistic EQs, bring up the lowing a little bit, maybe, work on the mid-range a smidge, and then brighten the overall mix a little bit. Okay, these would be brightening and sweetening moves that are very slight and very delicate. And then finally, more of a technical task per se, but if you are mixing an album of songs, EQ can be done to really make sure that each song, again, flows with each other and they sound the same for the most part. If you've got a song that's super heavy in the low end, a lot of chuggity chug chug, and then the other song, you're not really chugging as much, you might need to do a little bit of balancing with EQ, a little tiny bit, just to make it as uniform as possible. Again, congruent, cohesive listening experience. Clipping. All right, this is a topic. Now, there are plenty of videos on YouTube from very high-level experienced engineers who are going to say, never clip, don't do any clipping. Clipping on the master bus is terrible, don't do that. Okay. However, my counter argument would be, if you use any plugin incorrectly on the master bus, it's bad. So what would be the difference of using a clipper incorrectly versus using a brick wall limiter incorrectly? Both results are bad. So it's more about how you use the plugin and implement it. It's not just no clipping, never, don't do that. It's not quite the way that I want to think about it. So if we're going to use a clipper, there should be a reason. I've got 3 reasons. The very first reason would be transient control. In particular, a heavy snare transient. Okay, if you ever look at your waveform at the master bus, you're going to see these peaks coming up every once in a while, if a really hard snare hit or something like this. And with a clipper, you can control those. You can literally just clip those off, and then you can have much more control of your stereo waveform itself before going into the compressor, which is very important. Secondly, with a clipper, you can bring the body of the transient. So like if you've got a snare, you obviously clip the transient, but also you can increase the body information of that transient, which has the effect of something sounding fatter and fuller. Now, in this day and age, everyone wants a big, loud, fat mix that punches and is hard. Well, it's nearly impossible to get that result with just, your classic limiter compressor plugins. The clipper in the last 10, 15 years has kind of revolutionized mixing metal to get it to levels where I wouldn't say it was impossible back in the day, it was just much more difficult. And the third reason kind of goes back with the first reason. We're offloading some of what we want the compressor to do. So we want the compressor to compress and glue everything together. Well, if we can take some of those transient peaks and clean up, and control the transients going into the compressor, it's a much cleaner signal, and the compressor won't have to work as hard, in these major dynamic shifts. You can get a better overall sound. Now, I will say also that clipping is not necessarily to make the mix louder, although that can happen when you increase gain. I would caution trying to just use clipping to make a mix as loud as possible. That's still what the limiter is for. I would argue that you're using the clipping for transient control to add a little bit of fullness and beefiness to the transients, the mix itself, before going into the mastering compressor. So the mastering compressor, right? What is the point of the mastering compressor? The point is not to make the mix louder. That's not what we're doing here. We're not putting the mix through a mastering compressor to make it loud. Again, that's limiter's job. The point of a mastering compressor is to glue all those elements that you put in the mix, to suck it all in, make it sound cohesive and tight. That's what mastering compression does. That's the whole point. There's a makeup gain knob on mastering compressors. You bring the signal in, you adjust the settings, you get the compression that you want to get, then you A/B and adjust the makeup gain so that you have the same basically volume going into the plugin and out of the plugin. Just the difference going out of the plugin is the compression settings. So mastering compressor, bring everything together, bring everything, glue it, make it tight, make it work together as a cohesive unit. That's what mastering compression does. Okay, limiting. Here we go. This is where we make the mix loud. Now, the reason for all those other steps before you get to the limiter is to make sure that your mix is well controlled, dynamic, and balanced. Because the limiter can go off the rails if you have a very unbalanced mix with a lot of low-end spikes, but you're just not going to be able to get the mix as loud as you might want. Plus, it's also going to exacerbate all those low-end problems, and you're going to be sitting there going, well, what the hell's going on? I'm doing 13 dB of limiting to my mix, but it still sounds this big compared to, the Spotify mixes. Well, that's why. You have to really maintain the balance throughout the entire process so that when it gets to the limiter, it can actually do its job, which is just to make the mix louder. Now, of course, what kind of video would this be about mastering if I did not touch on the topic of the loudness wars? It's not necessary to smash the shit out of your mix anymore. The way that digital streaming platforms work, that actually don't want to have a mix that's smashed to minus 6.5 LUFS. People still do it, obviously, and there is something to be said about smashing your mix a little bit to kind of give it a little bit of that extra energy. But the point being that just loudness wins is not the point anymore, which is a fantastic thing, because if you want to understand what brick wall limiting and crushing the hell out of your mix sounds like, just go listen to anything in the mid-2000s in metal. So smashing to CD level, not really a thing anymore. You don't have to do it. You can, but I would caution you that if you are trying to get your mix at a minus 6.5 LUFS level, it has to be literally perfect in terms of balance, dynamics, automation. It has to be perfect before you can have any hope of your mix sounding as good at that crushable level, versus other professional mixers. Personally, I'll master around minus 10, minus 9 LUFS. I really don't care about absolutely crushing the shit out of music. I sing a lot of clients, music mastered at that level. No complaints. It all goes into Spotify anyway, which turns it down to minus 14 LUFS, so who cares? So with all these plugins out of the way, explaining why they're used, how they're used, let's go ahead and jump into Cubase and I'll show you in a song how to go about this process. So here we are. Let's start right away with the EQ. This is the song that I used for the 100 Years of Bear Dynamic, the IR video that I did for Bogren just a couple days ago. Just to refresh your memory, sounds like this. All right, so that's what we're working on. As you can see over here in the left-hand side, mastered with completely free plugins. I know you guys are going to ask, the drums are Fotis Bernardo drums from Stigmatized Productions. The bass is Digbeth from Aurora DSP. The guitar IRs are from the 100 Years of Bear Dynamic. I played through my Angle Savage 120 for those. Most of these serum presets are from tonepusher.com, and then I have some FX that I put in here. There we go. So let's talk about the mastering chain. That's why we're here. So first things first. The point of the EQ, again, slight shaping. So I'm just using regular stock EQ right here in Cubase. This is a studio EQ. This is not even like the better stock plugin. In Cubase Pro, there's frequency where I could do mid-side and things like this. I'm not talking about mid-side EQ or anything like that yet. That's more advanced stuff. When you can get a really good result with the basics, then worry about the advanced stuff, okay? So what's the point of the EQ here? The EQ, as I mentioned, we're taking care of problems that are kind of coming up only after everything has been put through the mix, okay? This is typically where, you could see like your cut here to do your shelf, around like 30 hertz or something like this. Just the big, what's the words I'm looking for in English? That'd be good. The excessive low end, that should be rolled off, things like this. Typical problems in metal are going to be like this murky low end buildup between 100 and 200 hertz. It's like a murky, it's hard to, like pillowy murky that just kind of puts a mask over the low end. It doesn't change the low end when we do this cut, but it masks it a little bit. You can also look around 500 hertz to 1000 kilohertz. Usually you can do something here to sweeten the mids a little bit, or maybe you have to scoop a little bit, too many mids. And then obviously very common to do a shelf of some sort, to brighten, heighten the mix a little bit. So we can do some of these right now. So basically what you do is you find pretty much the busiest part of the song and have a listen and then run the EQ. Okay, so just something like a high shelf on the entire mix makes it sound more exciting. Okay, let's talk about this mid-range cut here. So this particular mid-range cut just helps the bass grind through a little bit more, and it'll be helpful on smaller speakers, obviously, but just a little bit more mid-range information, so the mix didn't sound so scooped. A lot of times vocals will come through in this area between 500 to like 3K, growling vocals, not singing vocals. So that space tends to get filled up sometimes, but in the instrumental mix like this, a little bit of 700, whatever that is, fill it out a little bit more. Now this cut's very important. Now this is a cut that Cola showed where he makes this little cut to help clean up that low and murky muddiness. Now, it's interesting because it doesn't really affect the low end of the song at all, because your low end is below 100, right? Now, you have some body of the bass guitar in this area, but that's why you're doing a very subtle cut just to clean everything up when you have the snare blasting, the kicks rolling, and the bass and guitars all happening at the same time. When I disabled it, you saw how it got like a rumbly, almost out of control, sort of like rumbly. Just a small little cut, reduced the energy there, and it kind of made the mix sound more in control in the low end. You'll notice that none of these EQ moves are drastically changing the sound of the mix at all. The balance of the mix is what it is. These EQ moves are very slight and subtle. Again, we're enhancing what is already there. Now, after that, we go into G-Clip. I like this one because I have the analyzer here. I can see the waveforms. I can chop exactly where I want. And I have the gain, clip, and softness parameters. So the gain is exactly what it sounds like. We're increasing the fatness of the transients to make things sound fuller. Clipping is this level right here. We can set the level of where we want the clipper to chop the transients off. And then we have the softness. So you'll notice if you look right here, we can do like hard or soft clipping. The best way to explain this is it's the same concept as a compressor. A hard compressor, you know, the audio will hit that knee, called the hard knee, and it'll instantly react. It's just bam, instant compression. A bit of a softer knee, the compression will it'll ease into the compression. So the audio will hit the compressor threshold and it goes, nah. Whereas with a hard knee, it would be like right away. It would just slam right into it. It's pretty cool to do a little bit of soft clipping a little bit. So let's go ahead and set the clip level here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to listen to the transient. Excuse me, I'm going to listen to the song, but I'm going to be looking at any errant transients that we might have. Let's press play and have a look. So there's one, see? In relation to the rest of the mix. There's another one. So as you would expect, they're pretty much on the sound effects, or, you know, it would mostly be on the snare hits. So what we can do is we can bring this down just to that level. We don't want to go all the way like this. That doesn't make any sense. You want to just bring it down to the level and just clip a little bit of those transients off. You notice I'm not really doing anything to the transient, not changing it, not really doing anything. Now here, once you've set the level, you basically have set the range that the transients are allowed to work at. Now the entire stereo waveform is way more controlled before it would go into the mastering compressor. Very important. Right now we have this gain knob where we can fatten up the mix to our heart's content. This is where you want to be careful. I tend to introduce just enough gain where the mix sounds fuller. I don't really try to start slamming everything. It's not really my style. So let's introduce a bit of gain and see what happens. Actually do it with the instruments playing here. So watch, I'll just add a stupid amount of gain and listen to what happens to the fullness and fatness of the mix. Also, there's going to be a point where the mix just starts distorting harmonically in all other ways and it sounds terrible. All right, so it's a very powerful tool. So obviously at 0, it's still nice. You can hear the bass, you can feel it, kick drums rolling around. Let's add a little bit of gain. There we go. We're just adding a little bit of an extra bump, a little bit of fullness back into the mix. Not a lot. After the clipper, we have the mastering compressor. This is the Kotelnikov. I really liked using this compressor. I actually kind of think it's really good. And it's basic settings here. So what you're looking to do, this is all genre dependent, but generally in metal, you could do something arbitrarily like 30 millisecond attack and 100 millisecond release. You could also do auto release, or like 300 milliseconds could be another setting you can check out. It really depends on the tempo and what style of metal you're working on, okay? But the point of the compressor here, bring everything together. You'll also notice that it's going to have an effect on the snare transient, okay? This is the last layer of compression overall on the mix, and snares and drum transients can be sensitive to this. We need to be careful setting it. A good rule of thumb, between 3 to 6 dB of gain reduction. No rules, blah, blah, blah. Do whatever you want, whatever sounds good, blah, blah, blah. Okay, within reason. So what don't you want to do? So you don't actually just want to crush the threshold, because it'll get squished or squashed, and it'll be like there's no movement. There's nothing going on. Let me show you what that sounds like. So it's like the mix isn't breathing very much, so you want to avoid extreme levels of compression. At least I do. I don't, okay? So a good rule of thumb, anywhere from 3 to 6 dB reduction. Now you'll notice, even though we've done the clipping there, we've made it so that we've chopped off that transient so that the transient won't explode the mastering compressor when those sound effects hit. Truth be told, I could probably go into the mix and turn the sound effects down and blah, 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 but it's a demo song, okay? So even when that large explosion of energy happens, we're getting maximum 4 dB of reduction. Otherwise, for the most part, it's going between 2 to 3 dB of reduction, which I think sounds quite nice. Cool. Sounds like everything's together, cohesive like a unit. So after the mastering compressor, we have the loud max. Now, it's very easy to screw this up, okay? Don't crush everything to minus 6.5 LUPS, because that's, you know, a loud mix is a better mix. It's not it. Set your out threshold to minus 0.3 dB to make sure you never go above 0, okay? And then I like to set my threshold to around 9 or minus 10 LUPS, okay? So I have just a metering plugin that I'll do. I use this one. Okay, and I'll press play. And again, this is something where you kind of have to listen to the whole song, or listen to the chorus, or listen to the most busy or loudest part of the song, that the song triggers the limiter as much as possible. Let's have a listen. So the more you turn up the limiter here, the more your snare is going to disappear. That's the game that you're playing, right? If you're squashing your snare too much, it's too much limiting. This is the game that you're going to play. So I had my limiter threshold at minus 9, and we still had a nice open fat snare. Go over here. There we go. We're sitting at about minus 9 LUPS. It fluctuates, okay? And there you go. That's your mastering chain, all free plugins. You can absolutely get a great result. And you'll notice what like the limiter did. There are elements of the song that might pop out, that might become too loud, and you'll need to go back into the mix and you can readjust those. Leave the limiter on. It'll help show you imbalances that'll happening, like I was talking earlier, where maybe your low end's out of control, or here the synths are too loud. So you can have the song play, turn the synths off, for example, and then bring them back into the mix. There, we have the mix rebalanced. So this talks a little bit about something I'm going to say in just a moment here about mixing into a limiter and these things. But this is the essence of it, guys. You don't need to spend, hundreds of dollars for ozone. Just use these free plugins, learn how to use them, experiment how to use them with using them. And it's going to keep you honest because your mix has to be good for this chain to work to its full potential, but it will work. All right. There you go. So now you know how to use it, you know the plugins, and before we leave, there's one last question that we can discuss. The last question is, Scott, should I mix through my mastering chain? Maybe. Now, if you think about it logically, you can go, well, the music's going to be mastered and crushed at this level anyway. It would make more sense to mix at that level so I know how everything sounds, when I take the chain off and I send it to a mastering engineer or something like this. It just makes more sense logically. However, there are plenty of pro mixers who do not start a mix right away into the master chain. So that's why I say maybe. You should experiment. You should set up a chain with everything set up, and you should try mixing through it. What kind of results do you have? Start a mix where you put the mastering chain maybe later on. What kind of results do you have? Everybody works differently, and everyone who's in the professional field gets great results. Nobody does it the same. That said, there is a decent recommendation that seems to be well accepted, being that if you choose to start your mix without a mastering chain, typically after your drums are in order and your bass and guitars are in order and you're starting already to put a balance together, that would be a really good time to put your mastering chain in, at least the compression and the limiting. You're not really going to know what the clipping and the EQ move should be yet, but at that point, you could already start feeding things into compression in the limiter to see kind of what things are going to start sounding like, in particular the snare and drum transient. So it's up to you. You need to experiment to see what works best for you. But anyway, that's the video about mastering. This chain will work as I've just demonstrated to you, and this is also the chain that I use to mix the Oath of Tyr, which is on my metal mixing workshop that you can find on my website, chernobylaudio.com. Anyway, hope you found the video helpful. Let me know what you think about it in the comments. See you next video.